Good morning and welcome. Keith Ayers here from Integro, and glad to have you with us. We're going to be talking about conflict in the workplace, and mainly, well, I suppose I can go straight to the agenda for that. And what we are going to do first of all is just briefly talk about conflict. Most of the conflict training that's done or work around conflict that's done in organizations is around conflict resolution, has been for many, many years. And most organizations do something along those lines at some point in time. And I want to talk about what's different with the productive conflict profile. So what's the difference between conflict resolution and productive conflict, all right? And then I'm going to spend some time on everything this productive conflict profile and the learning experience around that. So that's the main focus of today, but the more important focus is to answer any questions you've got. So we're allowing a lot of time for questions, and I'm going to be going through the productive conflict profile fairly quickly. I assume that a lot of you who are here, because you've already had a look at the productive conflict profile, you may have even been using it, and just want to check in and see if there's anything else you could be doing. Okay, and then of course then we're going to go to questions. Okay, now first of all, just a couple of points about conflict. First of all, in a survey that Wiley did of over 12,000 people, asking them what their experience with conflict was, and 90% of the responses were negative. All right, that's probably no surprise to you. And in fact, I start off any session around conflict profile with what does conflict mean to you, and most of the responses to that are always negative. Okay, 70% of managers, directors, and executives said that conflict negatively impacts the efficiency in their department, right? And it's probably not a surprise to you. And 40% of people in the survey said that they left a job because of unhealthy conflict. All right. Notice using the term unhealthy there, because there is such a thing as healthy conflict, and that's where we're heading. Okay, so conflict is an uncomfortable yet unavoidable part of every workplace. Anytime you've got people together, there's a potential for conflict. Okay, so organizations need to learn how to effectively navigate conflict to thrive. Okay, let's look at conflict resolution. All right, it's the process of resolving a dispute without confrontation, reactively addressing conflict after the fact, and that's, I think, a key point. Often involves negotiation, mediation, or arbitration after a conflict has occurred, and aims to eliminate conflict with a step-by-step process. So what's the difference between that and productive conflict? Productive conflict is an open exchange of different ideas and opinions, productively engaging in the conflict in the moment, and all parties feel equally heard, respected, and unafraid to voice dissenting opinions, and strives to reach a mutually comfortable solution. All right, so the profile itself, it comes with a facilitator kit. The curriculum in that facilitator kit indicates the best results will be from a 4-hour workshop or session. There's quite a few videos in there as well to help illustrate things. And what I'm going to do is going to walk you through the profile. I'm going to do it fairly quickly because this is not about teaching you how to use the profile. It's about understanding the profile and what it can and can't do, and then allowing you to ask as many questions as you can afterwards. Okay, so so there's 3 parts to the profile and 3 modules to the facilitation. The first one is understanding conflict. It's understanding how you behave in conflict and how others behave in conflict using the DISC model. All right, because you may know from other sessions you've done with us, we use the whole person concept or iceberg model to illustrate that DISC is a needs-driven behavioral model. All right, people use the behavioral style they do because of their psychological needs. And based on your psychological needs, you will have certain tendencies when you get into conflict situation in order to satisfy those needs. All right, and sometimes what happens is it triggers your fear, which is the flip side of the need at the bottom of the iceberg. Okay, the second module and second part of the profile is recognizing your destructive conflict responses. Everybody has a tendency to react destructively, and we'll be looking at 18 of the most common destructive responses and how your style may impact on which ones of those you use. Okay, and then of course the third stage and the third part of the profile is, okay, what do we do about that? All right, how do I choose more productive responses so that we have productive conflict as opposed to destructive conflict? Okay, so diving into the first part, yourself in conflict, there are three parts to this. The first is understanding conflict using DISC, exploring your own DISC style in conflict, and learning about other DISC styles in conflict. So we're going to, in the sample report, and if you have an Epic account and you go into the Epic account, you can download sample profiles. And if you don't have an Epic account, you can go to integrate.com.au, our website, and download a sample report. And that sample report for the productive conflict profile is a report about Ruby. All right, and Ruby's a D style. So her tendencies when she's in conflict, she can be quite insensitive, wants to win, so can create win-lose situations, can be dismissive of others in conflict situations, and has a need to win arguments. Right, that's an important thing. As an SI style, I'm more worried about hurting people's feelings than winning arguments. So it's really important for me to understand that if I'm getting into a conflict situation with someone who's a D style, that I don't take it personally if they're continuing to argue. All right, and I understand where that's coming from. All right, so here's the profile. Okay, and if we dive into that, like with the other profiles, we have cornerstone principles. We have a definition of conflict, which is whatever you think of, conflict comes down to a difference of opinions involving strong emotions. So destructive conflict really brings out those negative emotions, all right? And so the profile is designed to improve awareness around conflict behaviors, all right? So I'm not going to go through all the detail because we need to just understand the whole model. And in the profile, like with other profiles, we have an overview of the DISC profile, and you'll see here that we've added in this profile how each of the styles tends to behave in conflict, what they focus on, right? And how that focus is related to their psychological needs of their style. Okay, so if we go to the narrative report, all right, we can see where Ruby's dot is. She's right on the edge of the map with a very high priority on control. So in conflict, she really has very strong need to be in control. You'll see she also has an extra priority on objectivity. So to along with the C profile colleagues, okay? And you would do the typical tick cross question mark here to personalize it and individualize it, okay? To get a better understanding of how do I behave in conflict, and it's influenced by my priorities. So you can see the difference between the D style have a high priority control. The S style has a very high priority on harmony. So their approach to conflict is going to be completely different. Okay, it really helps if we understand those differences, if we're going to work together effectively and resolve conflict. Okay, so the other thing that's like we have motivators and stressors in the workplace profile, if you're familiar with that, here we have what's important to you during conflict and what drains your energy during conflict. And so again, it's helpful if I understand what's important to me, and that's going to affect my behavior in conflict. And here again, we can see that Ruby's very important for her to win arguments. And so now we understand why she continues to argue until she gets the result that she's looking for. Okay. And of course, there's other things that drain your energy during conflict. Okay. And you can see that being challenged, having your authority challenged, people not being straightforward are things that would really stress Ruby and make it more difficult for her to be objective in conflict. Okay, all right. So the following section in the profile focuses on conflict with each of the styles, and this is useful information for you to understand how the way you approach conflict may be different from other styles. So Ruby can see that compared to her, people with the S style are more concerned about hurting people's feelings and so on. Okay, so this is really important for understanding others. So we started off with understanding yourself, now understanding others. And then the last part of the first section is a summary of each of the disc styles in conflict. Okay, so that's that part there. And then at the bottom, there's a reflection piece. All right, and the idea here is to reflect on a situation where you were in conflict that you wish you would have handled better. All right, so describe that situation below and what impact you think your disc style had on the situation and the way you reacted to it. Now, this is going to be a little case study that we're going to take with us through the rest of the profile and the rest of the facilitated workshop around this. Okay, so I've got this situation, a real life situation where I was in conflict and I wish I could have handled it better. So I'm going to learn how I could have done that. Okay, so then we go into the second part, which is understanding the destructive conflict. So we have a little situation or an incident that occurs, and Ruby reacts. And now that she knows how she reacts, how do I recognize my destructive conflict behaviors and what triggers them? All right. So this is part 2 of the profile and part 2 of the experience, the learning experience. Okay. And so what are the automatic thoughts that result in the destructive reaction? Okay. What are those destructive reactions? And how do I recognize them during the conflict instead of after? You know, because that's typically what happens, isn't it? We react to a situation and afterwards I go, oh, why did I do that? What caused me to do that? And it's actually your automatic thoughts that are causing the reaction. Okay, and so we need to learn to recognize the automatic thought when it comes up if we're going to be able to change it. But we'll come to that in just a moment. Okay, so this is based on cognitive behavioral theory. All right, and so this is the approach we're going to use. A conflict situation occurs, all right, which results in certain thoughts, and that triggers a response. Okay, now in this situation, this particular person is a C style, and their thought is, if this situation gets heated, it will be awful. And so their feelings are anxiety, and the behavior would be to withdraw. Now, withdrawal is a destructive conflict behavior because it's not going to help deal with the conflict or deal with the situation effectively with it. We're withdrawing from it. Okay. Another example, again, the C style person thought is, I can wear this person down with superior logic. So the feeling is defiance, and the behavior is to overpower the other person with logic. All right, so that's the cognitive behavioral approach. And so what we're going to be looking at now is what are the typical destructive responses, and what are the automatic thoughts that trigger them. So I'm not sure how well you can see that, but you'll see there's 18 destructive responses there, from arguing and belittling to caving in and defensiveness. All right, so all of those are destructive responses because they don't help deal with the conflict effectively, and they may in fact escalate the conflict. Okay, so why do we respond this way? It's because of the automatic thought that triggers the destructive reaction. Okay, and so in the actual session, what we encourage people to do is to put a tick on the, or a check mark as it says in the profile, on the 3 destructive responses that others use that bother you the most, that you have the most difficulty dealing with. Okay, and then put a star against the 3 behaviors that you do most often. All right, and so each person's going to personalize this, and particularly focusing on the ones that you do most often. All right, so then there's 7 pages of destructive responses. All right, and let's zoom in on one of those. All right, so we're going to look at arguing here. All right, and this is Ruby's profile, so it's a D style. So it's interpreting this for her. Like others with a D style, you sometimes have so much confidence that it's frustrating when others can't or won't see what's so obvious to you. All right, and so you continue to defend your position and argue. Now, the automatic thoughts that lead to this response, there's no way I'm backing down. So this situation arises and you immediately think, there's no way I'm backing down. So what do? You dive into arguing, right? Or I don't get it, or you don't get you. I'm obviously right, and so I'm going to continue to argue. Okay, so that's key to effectively dealing with conflict. Is first of all recognizing that I'm reacting destructively, and what is the thought that's triggering that. Okay, so and this relates to your DISC style. All right. If we look at the fears there, fear, loss of control for the D style. All right. That's something that's likely to trigger a destructive response, isn't it? Fear of disappointing others for the S style, etc. That fear of criticism of what they do for the C style, and fear of loss of influence or not being listened to for the I style, are the kinds of things that can trigger these reactions. There's a great page 19 in the profile. It's one of my favorites, and because it highlights the automatic thoughts that are typical of someone with your style. All right, and you can see here that the first one for Ruby is, I need to come out on top. Why don't you get it that I'm right? If you push me, I'll push back harder. So if these thoughts come up, of course, it's going to result in that arguing and controlling kind of behavior. All right. So the better we understand what those automatic thoughts are, the more likely we're going to learn how to manage them better. I remember when I first did this profile and got my result, and I got to this page and I read through these automatic thoughts for my style, the SI style. My first thought, Mark Scullard's is the research director that writes all this stuff in these profiles. And my first thought was, how does he know this about me? Because it was just so accurate. All right. And that's key, because if these are the things that actually come up in my mind, then these are the things I'm going to learn to manage better. Okay. Let's go back to the conflict situation we described on page 10. Remember the situation where you wish you could have handled it better. What were some automatic thoughts that you had? All right, so we're now going to build on that little case study. And then what was your response to the situation? How did your automatic thoughts influence that response? Okay, so how did it trigger destructive responses? Okay, so now we go back to Ruby. Now that I understand my automatic thoughts, that my automatic thoughts influence my behavior, how can I change my response in conflict? Which takes us into the third section of the profile and third module in the program. Okay, so they're going to practice catching and reframing automatic responses and continue evaluating and improving conflict experiences. So in the profile, we have this page which then takes that model we came up with first, which was the conflict and the automatic thoughts, and then the reaction. But before reacting, we need to learn to step back and reframe the automatic thoughts. All right, and then from that we can then choose a productive response. Okay, so underneath that you'll see anger and your D style and anxiety in your D style. If you're an S style, it'll say anger in your S style and anxiety in your S style. And these are typical ways in which people react when anger or anxiety come up in a conflict situation. All right, so that's just blowing it up a little bit more. And we're going to learn to catch and reframe the automatic thoughts. All right, so here's an example. Ruby, conflict situation occurs. Thought is you have no idea what you're talking about. So the feeling would be defiance and the behavior would be all argumentative. But instead of that, we're going to change that automatic thought to, he may have a different perspective. I need to listen, which results in a more open-minded feeling and the behavior of listening. Okay, so there's a page in the profile where people can start to practice that. All right, coming up with some examples of automatic thoughts that they tend to have, and some reframed thoughts, practice reframing them. Okay, in doing so, this little piece at the top of the page here is really, really valuable. All right, the way I reframe it is to ask these questions. Is this thought actually valid or true? Am I overreacting or exaggerating the problem? Is there another way I could look at the situation? All right, and so here we have the example on the previous page. They have no idea what they're talking about. Okay, they're coming at this from a different angle than me. Maybe I need to listen. All right, and so we then also go back to the little case study we started on page 10. All right, so I've described the automatic thought on page 19. Now I'm going to reframe that automatic thought and how am I going to react differently to that. The profile also has a worksheet. It actually has also a page where there's a number of productive responses that we could use, and which of those do we need to work on to be better at. Okay, so this is the final page in the profile, is a worksheet for describing a conflict situation. What were the automatic thoughts, and how did you reframe the automatic thoughts, and could you have done better? Okay, so I think that's pretty much about it, except I just want to add something here. Some of you, hopefully most of you, will be familiar with Catalyst, right? Which is everything DISC online, your profile online. And the productive conflict profile is not going to be put into Catalyst, but you can still use Catalyst to help you in dealing with a conflict situation. All right, and I've just covered an example here. Many of you would know Alicia, our general manager, excellent facilitator, loves doing 5 behavior stuff. And Alicia has a D style. All right, so if I go into my colleagues section of my profile, I can see what Alicia cares about. I can see when I need to pull her in, what are her strengths. And I can also see that she may be stressed by these things. And so I probably should avoid doing those things. But I'm also going to learn a lot about Alicia by looking in here that I can use when I'm working on reframing my automatic thoughts and coming up with a productive response that's appropriate to her style. Okay, so I think that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. And I know it's been a very quick overview, but I'd like to throw it open to you now for questions. And we are recording this, so if you don't want your image, your face appearing in the recording, you can put your questions in the chat box, or you can, if you're comfortable with that, you can just open your mic and say, hey, I've got a question, and we'll go from there.
Hi, Keith, it's Sue. I might kick it off with a question that we often get asked. I've got my team that have already done the workplace profile, and I want to continue the DISC journey with them. When it comes to a choice of where to go next, we've got productive conflict, we've got agile EQ. What would your advice be around what's next?
Okay. Good question. I think in most cases, I'm probably going to recommend Agile EQ as the second step with DISC, unless there are some conflicts going on in the team that we really need to resolve. In which case, then yes, productive conflict would be great. Now, the thing that helps me decide which one I'm going to use is that the Agile EQ profile is something that you can do with anybody. You can do this with a high-performing team where there's no conflict. All right. And what it's going to do is going to help them understand how they see situations, what's their mindset, and how is their mindset affected by their DISC style. All right. And in what situations do I have difficulty handling the situation because my mindset doesn't match the situation? I need to adapt my mindset, be more agile and using different mindsets, and hence the name Agile EQ. And so it's suitable for anybody. And in fact, the groups that I've taken through Agile EQ, one of the things they've really got excited about is that it's not only going to help them learn to deal with different situations at work, it's going to help them at home. Okay. Because it's a simple example. If I'm an S style and I've got a fair chunk of that, I'm pretty good at being, receptive, a receptive mindset. I go into situations wanting to be receptive and hear everyone else's point of view. But there's other times when I really need to be self-assured. It's not time to be receptive. It's time to use the D mindset of self-assuredness. All right. How do I do that? And so the profile and the training around that helps me learn to do that. Whereas the productive conflict profile is a very personal kind of thing. It's about me and my destructive responses, and how do I learn to manage those automatic thoughts, reframe them, and respond more productively to conflict. Okay, and so sometimes it would be helpful if I have someone that I know well and trust, and we've been doing this together, for them to see me reacting and say, "What's your automatic thought now, Keith?" And that's going to sort of alert me to the fact that, oh, I need to stop and think about what I'm thinking here, because it's my thoughts that trigger my behaviors. Okay, I hope that helps with the question.
Here's another one that's in the chat box from Andrea. How is the report generated? Does it use the workplace profile data? And would my dot sit in the same position as the workplace profile?
That's up to you. With any of the disk profiles, you can use existing data from another disk profile if someone's already done a disk profile. All right, so say they've done the workplace profile, obviously they've responded to all the disk questions to get their dot position. Now, if when you go to do the productive conflict profile, you choose to use an existing report, that is the workplace profile, it will copy those questions across into the productive conflict profile, and they will only have to answer the priority questions, because the priority questions are always different. So all of the all of the profiles have base questions that measure your dot position and priority questions that measure your priorities. Okay, so and then when you do that, when you use existing data, the dot is always in the same spot because you've used exactly the same questions, and that's what we would recommend. It saves you a lot of questions about, my dot's moved, how come? Since they've answered the questions, you should be asking them how come, right? But they still ask. Okay, any other questions?
Keith, can I just clarify that last one there? So you've got the base questions and then you have your priority questions. So if you have someone who's done the workplace profile, the base questions will come across, or the base answers will come across, but you still have to get them to do the additional priority questions?
Yes. Yeah. So when you're setting up the productive conflict profile, it's going to ask you, do you want to use an existing report? And if you say yes, it'll then bring up a screen where you can search for that report, and you find the workplace profile and you select that, and then it transfers all of their base question responses into the productive conflict profile, and then it still sends a link. You still send a link out to the participants, and they'll go in and they'll have about 20 questions to answer, which will be just the priority questions. Okay, so it's pretty simple.
And if you've got a full end-to-end program that's ranging, let's say 10 modules, and you know that you're going to be leveraging workplace, agile EQ, and productive conflict, would you recommend that it's all sent out as one? So they'll obviously do the base questions and then the two, well, technically there'll be 3 sets of priority questions, or do you recommend doing the workplace first, waiting for when it's the right time in the program, and then sending out the agile EQ priority questions, so on and so forth?
I would stage it. Yeah, I wouldn't do it all at once. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, now, there's a proviso on that in relation to agile EQ, and that is if you do it in Catalyst, because agile EQ is in Catalyst as well. Productive conflict is not. All right. So when you do the Catalyst profile, you automatically fill out all of the priority questions for workplace, agile EQ, and the management profile. All right, so they're already done. And so when you're ready to share the agile EQ profile with them, you're basically just unlocking it so they can see it in their Catalyst profile. All right, but with the doing it outside of Catalyst through Epic, I would suggest you, because you'd have to send out 3 separate links to them to get them to do all the priority questions. Okay, and that gets a bit more complicated. It'd be simpler to just send out a link when you're ready to deliver the profile. Okay.
And then how does that interact then with 5B's personal development report? Like, are the questions for that in Catalyst as well, or
No.
is that that's going to be done by Epic?
5B personal development is not in Catalyst, and it's not going to be at this point in time. The 5B products are kept separate. So when someone does the behaviors, personal development, they take the DISC profile and the base questions to get their report, right? And it interprets their behavioral style into the 5 behaviors and gives them a report back on that. All right. So it's yeah, that's I don't think I need to say much more about that.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah.
Just a follow up from that, Keith. Do the priority questions use credits? So that means, I guess, you're saying, Karen, when you go from workplace to productive conflict, would it use credits? And the answer is yes, it's regarded as a separate profile. Productive conflict profile is 20 credits. And the second part of your question is there a time recommendation on when you would use a workplace profile? That is, if someone did workplace 2 years ago, would you use their current workplace? Will that workplace profile for the conflict profile, or start from scratch?
I wouldn't recommend starting from scratch. I would because the research shows that a person's personality doesn't change much at all over time. All right. So this depends on how they responded to the questionnaire. If you respond to the question in the way we recommend you do, and that is focus on who you are as a person, not on how you behave in certain situations, right? Then who you are as a person doesn't change from time to time. You might get slight shifts of a dot, but in Wiley's research, the average, if there is a shift, it's going to be no more than 12 degrees in the 360 degrees. Okay, so very small shift. Most people come out with the same profile, and so it wouldn't be any problem for someone who did the profile 2 years ago, workplace 2 years ago, to use existing data to create their productive conflict profile. Now, sometimes people have changed roles, and they think they've changed, right? And so they're going to want to do it again and start from scratch. And in most cases, their dot will come up in pretty much the same position, right? There will occasionally be times where the dot will shift, and sometimes people want it to shift because they weren't really happy with where it was the first time, but that's another story altogether. And we would want to encourage people to think about that. Any more?
Keith, I've just got one question, which is around the use of the word conflict. You mentioned at the start that most people's reaction to that word is negative, or they see conflict as destructive and not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever worked with groups where you try to reframe that to agreement, or cooperation, or just to try to reframe it in our mind?
I haven't, and let me bring in Patrick Lencioni here, author of The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and the book The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team was the foundation, the model in that for Wiley working with Pat Lencioni to develop the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team programs and the 5 behaviors personal development profile. All right, and when Wiley was working with Pat to develop that, because conflict is one of the dysfunctions. All right, so how can it be one of the productive behaviors, healthy behaviors? And his argument was, if we don't want to use the word conflict, it's a clear indication that we struggle to deal with conflict, and we need to learn to deal with conflict healthily or productively and constructively rather than avoid it. All right, so that would be my reason too. I totally agree with that. I've had this conversation with many of the teams that I've taken through the 5 behaviors program with the team, and there's so many people just don't want to embrace the word conflict. But the better we understand it, we actually can encourage engaging in healthy conflict, because it's not going to get destructive. And that's what I would say to groups. If they want to change the word or use a different word, I'll just say, is there any conflict going on this team? Has there ever been any conflict going on this team? Well, do you need to learn to manage it better, handle it better, and make it healthy rather than unhealthy? And so let's embrace it.
It's Anita here. I have a situation at work at the moment where a manager and an employee are just not getting along at all. Looking at the profiles, they are complete, and I mean extreme complete opposites. And I'm trying to find a way to get them to, you know, adjust and come to closer together. So where one is like complete accuracy is number one, the other one is on the S scale. And so, you know, relationships are more important than the accuracy levels, and it goes on like that for just about everything. And I've been using you know, the results of this profiling to try and show the differences and try and work out, you know, where they can come a bit closer together. But I'm really having trouble because it's basically, well, this is how I am, and you know, the other party needs to come together. So do you have a recommendation as to, is there another tool, something else I can use, or another way of tackling this? Because I'm just don't seem to be getting much with it.
Yeah, I would first of all do a comparison report, right, between the two people, right? From Epic, and then sit down with them, and probably need someone to guide them through it and guide the discussion, because it'll come up with 6 continua showing where they each sit on each of those continua, and the first few will be where they're most different. So the first 4 are where you're most different, the last 2 are where you're most similar, and underneath each of those continua is going to talk about the roadblocks that might be caused by the differences or similarities, and also the benefits. And so I would be asking them to have a conversation about, have these roadblocks been getting in the road of them actually working together effectively? And so how do you then switch your focus from the roadblock to the benefit, right? Because each of those 6 continua will show roadblocks and benefits for the 2 people to look at. And then underneath that, they'll have tips for how I can adapt to work with the other person. So what's happening there by the sound of it is an unwillingness to adapt.
Well, I have a manager that says, well, this is the way he needs to work, end of story. Basically. Right. And you know, and that's where it becomes more challenging, I guess, because its expectations are different. And because there's such extremes, you know, it's not like you can just make a small adjustment to the other person's personality or core values or whatever. It's a major adjustment, which might end up with that person not being able to sustain that long term.
The thing is, the first step is understanding. Right? They've got to understand the differences, and that's where the comparison report can help with that. But you've got to go beyond understanding to acceptance. Accepting the fact that it's okay for the other person to have the priorities that they have. All right, and to understand that and accept it, and then value it. Right, but they need to both understand, accept, and value each other for it to work. Right. So if they're operating from a base, well, I'm right, and this is the way it's got to be, then you're not going to get any common ground. Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. I think is that acceptance is not really happening. It's the understanding is there, the acknowledgement is there, but the acceptance is not necessarily happening, and that's, I guess, where we're stuck. And it's just an awkward. I've used it as I've tried mediation with them. I've used a comparison report as well. I'm trying every tool in the trade to get this happening. But it might be more on acceptance from me that this is just not going to work.
Right.
Possibly.
Right. Have you looked at Catalyst?
I have looked at Catalyst.
Are they on Catalyst?
Yes, they are. Yes, sir.
Okay. In the groups section on Catalyst, something new that's only been out maybe 6 weeks or so is conversation starters.
Oh,
All right.
okay.
And so you can actually, there are some really great questions. There are 3 conversation starters. The first one's about understanding each other better. And the program actually in Catalyst gives you 3 questions for the people to discuss, all right, about where we sit on the continua and how does that show up. And if I'm typically fast-paced and someone else is steady-paced, how do I feel about slowing down, and how do they feel about speeding up? So it's asking questions to get them to talk about the need for adaptability and how we can go about doing that. Okay.
Mhm.
But you've got to
Yeah.
put them in a group. Put them in a group first, and then you
Yes.
can go to conversation starters. Okay.
All right. Thank you for that. I'll have a look at that one.
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile. Yeah, but the key is acceptance, and I think it's one of the things. If I think back over the many years I've been doing this, we've always emphasised the importance of understanding different styles. We haven't placed much importance, as I think we should, on accepting and valuing the different styles. All right, and we've got to
Yeah.
get to that.
Yeah. I've had conversations about that too. Like, you know, if there's a strong in the social, then utilize that, because it's actually in a sort of position, I guess, with sales. So, you
Right.
can utilize that to build some really strong relationships with your clients, But yeah, the emphasis, the manager, unfortunately, he values different things. shall we say.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the smallest spelling mistake or whatever, it comes down very hard on this employee, and it's just like it is in the picture, the bigger picture. You should be
Yeah.
looking at the bigger picture. And all right, I'll work on that. I'll try that conversation start, see if that works, and
Yeah.
hopefully I can get pull it from a different angle, because I'm just
And just
struggling.
also remind them about the cornerstone principles in the workplace profile. The first one is that all styles are equally valuable.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I think it's natural. We're brought up with judgment. As kids, we're judged by other kids, by parents, by teachers. So we grow up with a certain amount of judgment, hopefully not too much. But there is a tendency to judge people. And if they're different, we judge them negatively. And it just doesn't work.
Yeah, not fair enough. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, Annika. Okay, any other questions? Sarah, do you have a question? You're looking like you got a question.
So many questions, Keith.
Oh, okay.
I'm curious to understand how the 5B conflict integrates with productive conflict. And I was sort of loosely talking about it before. I'm curious from a deeper level, like if I've got a program that's using both profiles, I just want to make sure that I'm not inadvertently, knotting the learner's thinking in when and how to leverage the profiles, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, in actual fact, the productive conflict profile came about because of 5 behaviors.
Okay.
So Wiley launched the 5 behaviors profile in 2014, and within a very short period of time, but certainly within 12 months, it became very apparent that the behaviors that all teams struggle with the most are conflict and accountability, because both are about challenging people, right? And the conflict behavior in 5 behaviors is about conflict about ideas or issues, all right? It's not conflict about people or personalities. And it's about speaking up, disagreeing, challenging things that I don't agree with. And it's pretty clear that when you're working with a team that we need to get better at that. But of course, it's still uncomfortable for different styles to actually do that. The D style has no trouble saying, I don't agree with you. The S style has a lot of problem with that, all right, because it feels confrontational to them. And so that's why DISC is built into the 5 behaviors profile and into the program, so that each person can see how they're contributing to the the behavior, either positively or negatively, and what they need to do to adapt to get better at it. Okay, so a lot of the teams that have, let's say a lot, but some of the teams that have done 5 behaviors have also, as a follow-up, done the productive conflict profile session, because it's a different focus, because it's not focused on disagreeing about ideas. It's focused on understanding the destructive responses. All right, and it's as I included the DISC theory model just briefly in this presentation this morning, that it's particularly the needs and fears are what drive behavior. And so if I'm in a situation where a fear is triggered, the natural instinct is to react to that fear. All right, and so that's when I start needing to understand the those thoughts, automatic thoughts. Sorry, the mental blank there on the word automatic. So being more aware of the thoughts that are coming up, and I've for many years now, I've talked to myself using this one little question, and that is, isn't that interesting? Why am I doing that? And then as soon as I ask myself, isn't that interesting? What's going on here? I'm feeling really angry, right? Then becomes clear what the automatic thought is. I'm angry because I'm thinking this, right? And then I can start questioning and challenging that automatic thought. But I use, isn't that interesting, a lot. I do use that with other people too, not necessarily asking them, but I see someone react and say, isn't that interesting? I don't know what's going on there, right? That they're reacting that way, rather than getting sucked into some kind of conflict situation. Any more questions? Well, if any other questions come up, you can always follow up with us, either by phone or by email, support@integro.com.au. And thanks for coming. I hope it's been helpful, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.